Previously on Solo Leveling Ragnarok, Beru's sudden appearance stirred something deep within Suho, awakening memories that had long lain dormant. Now, with his next mission aligning him beside both his parents, Suho takes his first true steps into the hunter world, unaware that his path will soon cross with his first major threat, the monarch of fangs. Inside the dungeon, chaos had already erupted. Following Hunter Kim's transformation into a feral beast, his brain echoed with the same relentless command, "Kill the intruders within the domain of the monarch." The hunters, frozen in terror, tried to escape, but there was no exit. The monarch of fangs, now in full control of Kim's body, lunged at the helpless hunters, turning the dungeon into a massacre within moments. Meanwhile, beyond the bloodied corridors, the mining zone echoed steadily, with the sound of pickaxes chipping away at the glowing mana crystals embedded in the walls. Suho had put his 3 shadow goblins to work, watching them mine with inhuman efficiency and precision. Pride flickered in his eyes at the sight, until Beru, hovering nearby, gently reminded him of their original purpose in the dungeon, to grow stronger, to level up. But Suho, ever attentive, hadn't lost focus. He acted swiftly, reminding the Ant King that his strength could be restored right here, in this very place. Beru, caught off guard by the remark, tilted his head curiously and asked how. Suho simply pointed toward the scattered fragments of mana stones that littered the floor and gestured for Beru to scavenge the crumbs left behind. Though reluctant, the mighty Ant King complied, lowering himself to chew on the shards of crystallized mana. Just then, without warning, a jolt surged through Beru. A primal instinct flared within him as he bellowed in alarm, warning Suho of the presence of a monarch nearby. The abrupt shift in tone startled Suho, who paused to ask if it was his father. But Beru quickly denied it. This aura carried no trace of Jinwoo. It was raw, savage, and reeked of beasts. At the same moment, deep in the distance, the miners sensed it too. A low unease rippled through them as faint growls echoed from the dim caverns once meant to house the strike squad. Their instincts hadn't betrayed them. From the shadows emerged eyes glowing red, sharp, and menacing. A pack of beast-like wolves stepped into view, their presence steeped in bloodlust. Fear surged through the miners as their leader screamed for everyone to evacuate. One desperate worker, paralyzed by terror, tried defending himself with a pickaxe, but the creature's jaws crushed the weapon like dry wood, leaving the man defenseless. His cry for help pierced the air just as the beast lunged, but before its fangs could reach him, Suho intervened, driving a pickaxe straight through the wolf's skull and halting it mid-charge. Without hesitation, he shouted for the miner to run. The man didn't wait to be told twice, fleeing toward the exit while Suho turned to face the oncoming horde. Armed with nothing but a pickaxe, Suho eyed the wolf pack as identity tags flickered above their heads. They were steel-fanged lycans, their names glowing orange, marking each one as equal to a D-rank mistburn. Suho knew he could handle them, but his thoughts drifted to Lim, who stood behind him, unmoving. Refusing to abandon another colleague, Lim stayed firm. Seeing his resolve, Suho allowed it, silently commanding his shadow goblins to shield Lim if danger approached. With the decision made, he reached into his inventory and retrieved a weapon earned within the shadow dungeon. Lim, watching in stunned disbelief, couldn't fathom how Suho could summon gear out of thin air. His powers too bizarre to belong to any lowly hunter. Suho, unfazed, wasted no time. He rushed forward, blades in hand, meeting the lycans head-on. The beast charged back, jaws gaping wide, but Suho sliced through the first wolf with surgical precision, cleaving it apart in one swift motion. The threat didn't end there. 2 more lycans lunged at him from both flanks, but Suho reached over the corpse of the fallen beast and muttered, "Arise." Dark shadows coiled around the corpse, and in a blink, a shadowy lycan emerged, snatching one of the attackers in its jaws, while Suho met the other midair with a swift counter. From afar, Beru watched, a rare flicker of pride in his otherwise stoic expression. Suho was adapting fast. The Shadow Authority came to him with ease, far quicker than it should. Suho, meanwhile, was caught in his own thoughts, noting how shadow summoning didn't consume mana. He realized that by increasing his mana stat, he could expand his shadow army exponentially. Resolved, he struck again, bearing a dagger into another lycan's throat and uttering the same command, raising 2 more shadows. With his undead wolves assembled, he allowed the goblins to disperse one by one. From the corner, Lim shouted in stunned disbelief, calling out to Suho and emphasizing that there was no way someone like him could be a lowly hunter. His abilities alone shattered all expectations, and the power to tame dead monsters was beyond the scope of any E rank. Suho realized his actions may have raised suspicion and quickly tried to downplay the situation, but before the tension could escalate, a sudden notification blinked before his eyes. An urgent quest had arrived, demanding that he defeat the enemy who sought his death. Confused, Suho scanned his surroundings, wondering if any monsters remained hidden in the shadows. He had already slain all the lycans. Just then, footsteps echoed in the distance, heavy and deliberate, drawing nearer until Kim's silhouette emerged from the darkness. Lim, recognizing him as a member of the strike squad, stepped forward anxiously, thinking salvation had finally arrived. His voice carried a tinge of relief as he began explaining the ambush to Kim. But Suho caught something off, an unnatural, faint red glow in Kim's eyes, a detail too sinister to ignore. Alarm bells rang in his mind as he tried to warn his senior, but Kim's movements turned vicious. Without hesitation, he swung his blade with full force, ready to cleave Lim in half. Suho reacted instantly, grabbing Lim by the collar and yanking him back just in time as the sword slammed into the ground, sending debris flying in all directions. Regaining his focus, Suho called out his shadow lycans. The wolves sprang to life, their dark forms melting into the surroundings as they lunged toward the attacker like a pack of predators. Seizing the brief window, Suho hauled Lim to safety, distancing him from the clash as he looked back to see a red tag floating above Kim's head, an unmistakable sign that marked him as the possessed Fang of Rakan. Dread coiled within Suho. A red name was no ordinary threat. It signaled a foe of overwhelming power. Memories of past encounters with such enemies surfaced, reminding him of the grim odds ahead. Glancing toward the Ant King for guidance, Suho awaited counsel. Beru, quick to assess the situation, confirmed that while Kim now carried the aura of a monarch, his strength hadn't yet reached that devastating threshold. Still, he warned Suho to steer clear, insisting this was not an opponent he could face in his current state. But Suho disagreed. Without hesitation, he pulled open his inventory and retrieved every weapon it contained. He believed the system existed to help him grow, and if this urgent quest had appeared, then the path to victory must be possible. His eyes burned with resolve as he took a stance, twin daggers in hand, declaring to himself that he would bring down a red name here and now, and evolve through it. Beru, quietly listening from the side, found himself intrigued by the boy's resolve. He watched Suho with newfound interest, noting how his unyielding spirit mirrored the very essence of a monarch. But as his gaze returned to the enemy, a realization struck him. There was something wrong, not with Kim, but with the weapon he wielded. Beru quickly informed Suho that the true enemy was the sword itself. If Suho could cut off the host's arm and separate the blade from his body, the possession would end and the danger would be nullified. Armed with this insight, Suho adjusted his strategy. Pouring mana into his shadow lycans, he commanded them to regroup and attack the possessed Kim from every direction. One managed to clamp its massive jaws around Kim's blade, locking it in place with brute force. but the effort was futile. With a roar and a burst of inhuman strength, Kim swung his blade, shattering the lichens into smoke with each blow. The battlefield shifted once again as Suho watched in horror. The Fang of Rakan gleamed with otherworldly power, each strike an echo of something far beyond human. Kim's possessed form exuded arrogance and malice as he bellowed in fury, his voice filled with contempt as he questioned how someone so insignificant could wield the power of the Shadow Monarch. Suho was stunned to hear the host speak, while Beru shrieked in outrage, fury rippling through his aura at the insult hurled at Suho's lineage. Upon hearing it, Kim's tone changed. Amused now, he acknowledged Suho's bloodline as that of his ancient enemy, the Monarch of Shadows. Then, a twisted grin spread across his face as he hurled himself toward Suho like a predator closing in on its prey. Reacting swiftly, Suho reached into his inventory and pulled out a goblin's axe, hurling it with deadly precision. The weapon sliced through the air like a missile, but Kim's reflexes were too sharp. He cleaved the axe in two mid-flight with a single swing. Suho wasn't surprised. He had anticipated as much. Fighting a red name was never going to be easy. Unflinching, he activated Ruler's authority, summoning every weapon within range and launching them like a storm of blades toward the enemy. Swords, daggers, axes, all tore through the air in unison. But Kim deflected them all, his movements terrifyingly fluid as he broke through the storm and charged at Suho with relentless ferocity. Gripping his dagger tightly, Suho braced for the assault, but Kim shattered his blade in an instant with a brutal swing and raised his sword high, lunging forward to strike him down. Desperation kicked in. Suho dodged, moving instinctively, weaving through a violent flurry of attacks that sliced through the air, inches from his skin. It was now clear. One solid hit would end him, and the longer the fight dragged on, the slimmer his chances would become. Kim's voice cut through the chaos, mocking Suho as he continued to evade. He accused him of cowardice, claiming he was just like his father, hiding behind shadows rather than facing battle head-on. The words struck a nerve, igniting a flame of frustration within Suho. But despite the sting, he knew the truth. No matter how much it burned, he wasn't strong enough to face this enemy directly. Not yet. His mind raced, recalling an earlier conversation with Beru when he'd asked the Ant King why the powers he wielded while climbing the tower hadn't returned, even though his seal had been lifted. Beru had explained that the strength Suho once held in the tower wasn't truly his. It had been part of a test to measure his potential to harness such might. That place existed in neither dream nor reality, and so the overwhelming strength he'd used there was expected to vanish once the trial was complete. Even so, Beru had reassured him that those experiences weren't meaningless. If he could recall the instincts, the feelings, and the indomitable will forged through those countless battles, he could still turn the tides in this world. Back in the present, Suho shook off the weight of thought and clung to the memories of those tower battles while he desperately evaded Kim's relentless attacks. He remembered clearly how he had overcome impossible odds back then, relying solely on his fists and the gauntlets that had become his lifeline. Now, he longed for them again. Then, something clicked. A jolt surged through him as he recalled the astral forms of his shadow soldiers. An idea sparked, and with a sharp gesture, he summoned his shadows once more from the depths of darkness. Kim, visibly frustrated by what he perceived as the same tired tactic, raised his sword high, aiming to end the charade once and for all. But just before his strike could land, the lichen Suho had summoned, expected to leap at Kim, suddenly wrapped themselves around Suho's outstretched arms. The sword still came crashing down with a thunderous boom, shaking the battlefield. A grin twisted Kim's face, only to be wiped away as the dust settled and Suho stood unharmed, halting the blade mid-strike. Suho's hands were now encased in gauntlets forged of shadows, steel-fanged lichens sculpted into a sleek, intricate form that gleamed ominously in the dim light. With a surge of strength, he shoved Kim's blade aside and forced him to stumble back. At last, Suho had seized control of the fight. Baru, watching from the sidelines, could barely believe it. The Shadow Monarch's gift was the ability to ascend endlessly, but for Suho, once a mere larva before his liege, to instinctively merge his summons into weapons without guidance was something altogether extraordinary. And Suho showed no signs of stopping. He rained down relentless blows with his new shadow-forged gauntlets, each strike precise, fueled by his regained instincts. Finally, a thunderous punch hurled Kim's possessed body across the battlefield, sending him crashing violently into a stone wall. Yet even that wasn't enough to silence the beast. Kim rose again, roaring in primal fury, his rage undiminished. Suho didn't pause. He summoned the power of the ruler's authority, calling every scattered weapon to his side. Swords, axes, daggers, all whirling around him in a deadly orbit. They launched as one, a storm of steel streaking toward Kim, and Suho charged alongside them, his own weapons gripped tightly, ready for the final blow. The assault hit with overwhelming force. Kim's sword arm was severed in an instant as Suho's unyielding momentum brought the battle to a decisive end. The monarch of Fang's possessed vessel was defeated. The confrontation was over. As the dust cleared, Baru approached Suho, marveling at the young monarch's growth. In this brutal clash, Suho had demonstrated the kind of potential that couldn't be measured by rank alone. Panting, Suho examined the gauntlets. He'd been cautious, wary of Kim's red name status, marking him as a deadly foe, but in the end, the challenge hadn't been insurmountable. More importantly, the battle had taught him a new path forward, a new way to fight that he could rely on. With that, his focus shifted as a system notification blinked to life, signaling a reward. It was another runestone, Storm Slash, a skill that infused his blade with the howling force of wind, allowing him to cleave through multiple enemies in a single strike. Excitement surged through Suho. This was the reward he had hoped for most, and somehow his instincts already knew how to wield it. As his gaze fell on the fallen sword, a malevolent voice echoed from the weapon itself, resentful, snarling. It cursed its defeat, fumed at the humiliation suffered at the hands of the Shadow Monarch's descendant, and warned that any human who dared wield it would be consumed by greed. Unshaken, Suho reached down. The moment his hand gripped the hilt, the red aura surrounding the blade cracked and crumbled, its resistance collapsing into silence. A system prompt confirmed it. Suho had obtained the item Fang of Rakan. He studied the weapon's design, sleek, elegant, far superior to the crude goblin blade he'd carried before. It exuded silent menace, a readiness to unleash devastation. Inside, the sword spirit reeled in disbelief. A human, resisting its domination, even one of the Shadow Monarch's lineage, was inconceivable. But what it didn't know was that Suho's system status had already nullified any such influence. Gripping the blade tightly, Suho activated Storm Slash. A violent tempest of mana erupted from the weapon. The air screamed as debris was torn from the earth and hurled in every direction. The sheer destructive force stunned even Suho, who quickly noted the heavy toll it took on his mana. Baru, just as amazed, found himself comparing the move's raw power to the Shadow Authority itself. Just then, Lim stirred and began regaining consciousness. As he looked around, he caught sight of Suho hastily hiding the sword behind his back, trying to appear casual. Suho greeted him, trying to ease the tension, but Lim's gaze drifted to the unconscious body of Hunter Kim, his severed arm a grim reminder of what had transpired. Alarm flickered in Lim's eyes as he tried to steady himself, while Suho calmly suggested they exit the dungeon. Outside, warm sunlight welcomed them, a stark contrast to the shadowed chaos they'd just escaped. Yet even in the brightness, the weight of their experience hung heavy. Suho soon announced he'd return to search for other survivors. Lim, still dazed but trusting, agreed to wait. Back in the dungeon, Suho cleared through the remaining lichens. Each kill fed his experience, leveling him further. Yet something bothered him. Fang of Rakan felt weaker. He turned to the blade, questioning the sudden drop in attack power. The sword responded with arrogant disdain, claiming it refused to serve a descendant of the Shadow Monarch, dismissing its reduced power as a choice made in protest, especially against weaker foes. Beru quickly jumped in with mockery, berating the sword's pride. He pointed out how Suho had already proven himself by defeating the sword, a foe once far stronger than him. The weapon faltered under the Ant King's words, its justifications crumbling. Suho, meanwhile, couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of his current allies, a talking insect and a sentient, sulking sword. Putting their banter to rest, Suho ventured deeper into the dungeon, combing through the wreckage for any signs of survivors. The air grew heavier as he neared the heart of the ruin, but it was all in vain. There were no survivors. Only total devastation remained. The sword broke the silence with callous pride, boasting about how it had eliminated all intruders in its duty to protect the sanctuary of the monarch of fangs. Disgusted, Suho drove the sword into the ground to shut it up. Just then, a system notification blinked into view, revealing that shadow extraction was now available for use on the fallen hunters. Suho stared at it, unsure. Beru explained that any corpse, regardless of its origin, could be turned into a shadow soldier. But Suho hesitated. Instead, he began lifting the fallen hunters' bodies, determined to carry them to the surface. Beru was puzzled by Suho's hesitation to use shadow extraction, but Suho answered without pause. To him, making these hunters fight even in death felt like a second punishment, one they hadn't earned. Beru watched in quiet admiration as Suho shifted the conversation, now asking about the sanctuary, if it truly belonged to a monarch. Beru confirmed it did, which led Suho to a larger question: his father. He wanted to know about the monarchs and if everything was somehow connected to the Atarim. Beru answered with respect and clarity. The Atarim were current enemies of his liege, while the monarchs had once been their bitter foes. He spoke of the 9 monarchs, starting with Suho's father, Jinwoo, the monarch of shadows, the king of the dead. There was also the monarch of fangs, ruler of beasts, the monarch of plagues, queen of insects, the monarch of the iron body, commander of monstrous humanoids. Along with them were the monarch of white flames, who led demons, the monarch of the beginning, master of giants, the monarch of frost, ruler of snowfolk, the monarch of transfiguration, wielder of demonic specters, and lastly, the monarch of destruction, sovereign of berserk dragons. Beru emphasized that when these 8 monarchs invaded Earth, they had been met and defeated by Jinwoo alone, his power far surpassing all of theirs. Suho listened, stunned by the weight of his father's legacy. The sword, sensing the topic, hissed with venom, confirming that it had indeed lost its master, the monarch of fangs, to Jinwoo. It seethed, bitter and humiliated, spitting out that if its powers hadn't been tainted, it would have torn Suho apart and fed him to the wolves. But Suho remained calm, understanding the resentment. He acknowledged that while his father had fought to protect Earth, the sword had loyally guarded its sanctuary. Both sides had acted out of duty. Still, he questioned the blade. If its mission was to protect this place, why oppose the only one capable of continuing that protection? Why remain hostile to someone fighting for the same cause? The sword snarled, unwilling to let go of its hatred, but Suho stood firm. He spoke of his goal, to reunite with his mother and father, separated from him by otherworldly invaders. And for that, he would draw strength from any source, no matter where it came from. He reminded the Fang of Rakan that the Atarim's coming threat wouldn't spare even this sanctuary. If it truly cared to protect anything, it needed to reconsider. Then, grasping the blade and pulling it from the earth, Suho made his choice. He offered partnership, not submission, but a concord between Shadow and Fang, a unity forged for survival and something greater. Later that evening, Suho's phone buzzed nonstop, overflowing with scouting offers from guilds across the country. His recent display of power in the dungeon had cast him into the spotlight, attracting interest from all directions. Yet, despite the volume of messages, none of it stirred excitement in him. Most offers were for porter or collector roles, jobs far beneath what he sought. Those positions offered stability, not strength, and for someone like Suho, who was steadily growing through the system's trials, joining a guild now would only shackle his progress. He saw no merit in entertaining such distractions. His focus instead remained locked on the Fang of Rakan. His mind drifted back to the tense yet pivotal conversation he'd shared with the sentient weapon deep within the dungeon's ruins. There, Suho had proposed a bold pact, an alliance between Shadow and Fang. The suggestion had clearly rattled the sword, so unconventional that it momentarily silenced even its scorn. But eventually, the sword had agreed, on one condition. It demanded to be brought to another sacred ground of the monarch of Fangs. And even now, Suho's thoughts circled around that demand, trying to piece together the next step. He asked the weapon whether it could locate such a place. The Fang of Rakan, with unmistakable certainty, claimed it could sense the sacred grounds regardless of how far they were. However, it also revealed that one of the sites had already collapsed, its gate likely destroyed in what humans termed a dungeon break. That meant the sacred ground had become a field-type dungeon, an area no longer protected by a gate, overrun by monsters, and left abandoned by time. The terrain would now be volatile and corrupted, offering no safety and no rules. Still, Suho didn't hesitate. Accepting the danger, he messaged his uncle with a simple reassurance not to worry if he couldn't be contacted for a while. Then, with quiet resolve, he set out, prepared to confront whatever lay ahead. His destination was now another sanctuary of the monarch of Fangs. After a long journey on foot, he finally stood before a heavily fenced-off area tucked away in the shadow of the mountains. The place was eerily silent, untouched and secured by tight perimeter fencing. Suho studied the land beyond, where the unnatural stillness of the air was more telling than any guard. He turned to the sword in his hand, asking if this was the place. The Fang of Rakan confirmed it without delay. With a smooth motion, Suho vaulted the fence, landing on the other side without alerting a soul. Immediately, the landscape changed. The air thickened into a dense blue fog that cloaked the terrain like a veil, distorting visibility and shrouding the area in an alien atmosphere. Suho narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of the environment, quietly wondering if all field dungeons shared this unnatural haze. Beru, ever watchful, offered an explanation. The fog, he said, was not earthly. It was mana from outer space, a power capable of rupturing dimensional walls and spilling foreign realms into this one. The Fang of Rakan added with grim affirmation that this was the very energy responsible for cracking the barrier between Earth and its sacred ground. This mana was both a source of great strength and a sign of deep instability. Beru continued, warning that beings from outer space had been working tirelessly to tear a gaping hole through dimensions. They needed mana to stabilize their passage, and the more powerful the mana, the harder it was for them to travel freely. Hence, their effort to flood this world with it. Suho understood what that meant. The truly powerful enemies had yet to step through the breach, but their arrival was inevitable. If he didn't grow stronger before then, Earth would fall. That thought alone lit a fire in him. No hesitation remained as he pressed forward through the thick fog, step by step, toward the sanctuary's entrance, now hidden within the depths of this dangerous and broken field. From his vantage point above, Suho carefully scanned the scene below. He had expected the field to be deserted at this hour, but much to his dismay, the area was anything but empty. Despite the creeping night, figures moved about with purpose, their activity raising immediate suspicion. His eyes narrowed as an armored vehicle rolled into view. Near the gate, a group of guards stood on edge, weapons in hand and attention sharp. Moments later, 3 civilians were dragged out of the vehicle. Their hands were bound, their eyes blindfolded, and their posture betrayed terror. The situation instantly shifted from strange to sinister. Suho's gaze locked onto a particularly aggressive thug who yanked a girl forward and grabbed her face with mocking cruelty, laughing at her muffled cries. Suho's jaw clenched. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't monster hunting. It was human trafficking. Beside him, Beru watched warily, his voice low and measured as he advised against any interference. As trespassers in a restricted zone, Suho's involvement could put his status as a hunter in jeopardy. There were protocols, systems, consequences. The logical path was to observe and move on. But before Beru could even finish, Suho had already vanished from his side. The decision hadn't required thought. It was instinct. With a father who had served as a detective in violent crimes and a grandfather hailed as a heroic firefighter, Suho had been raised under the weight of real-world justice, of action, of sacrifice. Bravery wasn't just an ideal in his family, it was a legacy, and now that legacy burned through him as he sprinted headfirst into the unknown. That's it for the 3rd episode of Solo Leveling Ragnarok. Stay tuned. More episodes are on the way. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss episode 4 when it drops. I'll see you soon with a brand new chapter.